Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be showing you how to install this new power supply in your vintage Macintosh SE or SE30. There will be a small amount of soldering required, but I've more or less designed it to be a drop-in replacement. This power supply is going to replace any of the three types originally issued with these computers. The three types being Astec, Sony, and Hitachi. The Hitachi is commonly known as the made in Singapore version because it doesn't actually bear the Hitachi name anywhere except the logo on the PCB. So let's get started. Here we're looking at the analog board for this Macintosh computer with the power supply attached. This one happens to have the Astec version currently installed. So we're going to go through and pull this off. So what I recommend first is pulling the 10-pin connector here. You can see here it has a latch release, so depress the latch and then give it some wiggles up and it'll come free. Flip the power supply over. You're going to see we have 4 mounting screws holding this in place. So we got 1 here, 2, 3, and 4. So let's start by taking those out. Alright, then you should be able just to lift away the analog board from the power supply. Couple notes on the analog board. I would highly recommend while you have it out that you go ahead and replace the electrolytic capacitors. It should only take you 30 minutes to an hour to do so, probably longer to actually go through and order all the correct parts with the lead spacing and dimensions correct. The second item would be all of the Molex connectors. It's pretty common for the pins going to the backside, the solder joints, to crack over time. They can lead to, straight opens, or you'll wind up with intermittent contact, which can cause a whole host of issues that can be very puzzling to sort out. So I'd recommend taking 5 or 10 minutes now just to go through and reflow every single solder joint for these Molex connectors. In order to get to the access to the backside of the board, you're going to need to pop off this protective cover, which is held in place with these plastic pop rivets. You depress the pop rivet in the center. They have a center post that comes up that flares out the flange there. So what you're going to want to do is depress that center section, and then it should be able just to pop right out. Some of them are a little bit more annoying than the others, but you'll get the hang of it pretty quick. Now that we have the back off the board, we can get a better look at it. Let's see, and this is our power connector right here. So let's take a quick look at it. This top pin right here is cracked, actually. Let's see. There we go. I think you can see it there. So that's exactly what we're talking about. This is likely to develop on all these over time. It's super common on single-sided boards especially. Do yourself a favor, go ahead and reflow all these joints, and that way you will deal with that problem right from the get-go. Alright, so first we're going to be looking at the Astec power supply, and you can see on the Astec it comes with this label. Model AA13800. This uses 3 screws to hold the top cover in place, so let's go ahead and pull those off. So this should just come right off. My experience so far is that the sheet metal on these isn't the highest quality, so they can be kind of annoying. You see we have a couple clips that hold it into the rail on the sides. This is the only power supply that actually uses a strain relief on the harness coming out, so we're going to need to compress that to remove that. And then we can see in here we're going to get access to the spade connectors that go to the power switch. So to pull the strain relief on the wiring harness, you can use a pair of pliers, a pair of vice grips. I happen to have a pair of the Hitachi pliers that are designed specifically for this, which makes life a lot bit easier. So then you're just going to want to compress it. It's going to take a little wiggling, get it out there. Feed the wires out of the slot that's at the top of the board. We have a few connection points here holding this board in. We got a screw down in here that's holding PCB down to the frame. Got a screw here, and then we have the ground lug right here that's soldered to the board. So I got a 7mm wrench. Just go ahead and pull this off. And we'll go ahead and pull the screws out. And then this is kind of the annoying part when you have to finagle, basically on all three versions here. This one's not too bad, but it's sort of wedged in there pretty good. And the rear of the PCB kind of will catch on the backside of this frame. So you kind of flare it out a little bit and then pull it and pull that corner free. And then you can start to get it to release. So all we're trying to do right now is give ourselves enough slack that we can pull off the spade connectors to the power switch. You can see they're color-coded, brown and blue. Make note of the orientations or the connection point. And then we're going to use a pair of needle nose pliers. There we go. Comes one. Do the lower. There we go. Now's a good time to check that everything's intact and reasonable. So this looks overall pretty clean. Now the next thing we're going to need to do for this is we need to reuse the spade connectors and wires to solder to our new PCB. I've already pulled some of it away, but there will be some glue surrounding these, so it helps to go ahead and use you know, a pair of straight needle nose pliers to come in here and work on, you know, ripping some of that back as best you can. So there's a couple ways to pull off these wires. One, you can just use your soldering iron to heat them up, solder joints, and then just pull them out while the solder is liquid. Don't really recommend it because you can end up with molten solder splattered around. If it hits you in the hand, it can be pretty uncomfortable. So you can use some solder wick to wick it away. Or what I'm going to do, since I have it available, is I have a desoldering suction device. Okay, now they're free. 1 and 2. So we don't need to worry ourselves about this ground connection here. This just connects two capacitors that are part of the line filter network. The unit is already grounded from the AC jack to the middle frame just as a direct connection here. So we want to make sure that that remains intact and is super solid. That's your main safety ground. You can see here on the new PCB silk screen, I have it labeled here for the Astec connection, which corresponds to the neutral and line connections, which are blue and brown respectively. So we can take our two connections here, two wires, insert them through the hole. So there's one, brown, and then we're in. So now we're just going to want to flip on our soldering iron and land these connections. And that's it for the soldering. So now it's time to land the new PCB into the original enclosure. First thing to do is make the connections for the AC mains to the switch. And that's best to be done before you try to mount anything up due to the limited amount of space. So our wires are landed. So the trick to getting this PCB in the enclosure is guiding the PCB through this metal cutout right here, or the support. So on a flat surface, I like to put one corner, this corner, inside the frame, and then pivot around to have the PCB swing through that guide on the other side. And then it should be pretty easy. It just wraps around, nice tight fit. You can see our holes lining up here. So we'll go ahead and drop in our screws. Now, I recommend on this one and all power supplies and a lot of things that you're putting together that you only land the screws first without fully tightening them. It just makes your life a lot easier. If you go ahead and tighten one down before landing the others, you'll find that things don't seem to line up quite right. So now that both are in, pressed in the correct position, go ahead and tighten. All right. So now we are fully mounted. Double check your wiring, make sure everything is still in the correct place. We're looking good there. Now, the next step is to guide the harness wiring into the original cutout. Now, one thing to note is that the replacement wires have thicker insulation than the originals. Same gauge. See here, can you see that? Not quite. Well, they're both 18 gauge. So the trick here is that you're going to want to sort of feed. Let's see, what's the best way for you to see this? You're going to want to feed just one or two wires in at a time, okay? Until you have all of them fed through. Being careful not to gouge any of them on the way in. Now the trick is to press this grommet into place. Start working your way around. As you can see, you can start getting the grommet to go through. There we go. So it is cleanly protruding through both sides. So, and that's going to give you the necessary protection around the wiring harness from the metal frame, so you don't have to worry about shorts or anything in the future. All right, so what I like to do is I like to leave the metal cover off but when I install the assembly to the PCB, just so I have better visibility on what's going on with the wire harness and anything else that might be going on. So another thing I like to do here is do a little preform on the wiring harness. It's a little thicker, a little stiffer, so if you just take it, give it a good bend over like that. That'll form in your hand, the heat of your hands for a moment. Then that way you end with a nice angle there. So then I like to go ahead and land that connection on the PCB, making sure that you have the orientation correct. And now, just a matter of, there we go, getting it in place. So it's a little stiff, it's gonna move around, so it's a little tricky, but not unmanageable. So I like to take the whole assembly, flip it upside down, and then I will line up the holes in this manner. Let's see. And sort of same rule as before, I just like to land them and get them started. Don't tighten them, so that way you have some play and everything to get everything lined up.
All four back in. Which can be annoying sometimes.
All right, make sure they're good and snug, not over tightened. And voila. We have our power supply, the new PCB mounted back on the board. You can see we got enough space there, enough angling. And the thing is, once this thing kind of runs again, gets some heat into it, these wires are going to soften and self-form essentially into position there. So it's going to be a real nice snug fit. Now we're going to want to go ahead and put our metal cover back on. But just as a reminder, please ensure that the Nut holding the safety ground down to the wire or metal frame is very snug and secure. We don't want that to get loose on us. Okay, now we can place this back in. Make sure our tabs line up. There we go.
Starting.
Then, now that all three are in, go ahead and tighten them down. Now, one note, there should be a ground strap coming off the top of the power supply. I happen to be missing one. I only actually have the analog board here. So install that in the correct location per the way you removed it. All right, folks, so there we have it. That is how you replace the power supply PCB in your Astec model power supply. And now we're going to go through on replacement for the Sony and the Hitachi. I'm going to spare everyone the removal and installation from the analog board, so just reference this first part of the video for those instructions. Next up, we got the Sony power supply. We're going to start by taking out the 4 screws that hold the cover on. Then this lid pops up and then you slide it forward to release it. You can see the little hooks here. Release it from these tabs to get out. Next, we are gonna want to remove this clamp. Pop that screw out. And we're not gonna need to keep this around for the installation of the new power supply. Now we have 3 screws holding the PCB down to the middle frame. We could also go ahead and pull the connector off here, power connector. This has already been broken free, but you can see they use a little silicone glue to secure it down to that choke right there. So that can just be pulled off pretty easily. Next, we're going to want to pull out the wiring harness here. So it has a little plastic clip in here acting as the edge protector for the wiring harness. A little plastic tab. You can just lift that tab up and just release the whole thing. You could reuse this if you'd like. It's pretty tight, pretty snug on the new wiring harness since the insulation's thicker. So I actually have preference just to use the rubber grommet. But if you want to keep this, you can give it a whirl, try it yourself. Pop all the wires out through the top. All right. A little bit of a trick. You gotta flex it out here a little bit. It kind of helps. And then you're able just to pull it out. All right. So there we have it. And now's a good time to go ahead and remove the thermal pad and paste from the enclosure. Next step is to desolder and remove the original Sony power connector. If you were so inclined, you could cut off the connector off the wiring harness, strip the wires back, and make a direct connection to the PCB. But I did include the appropriate footprint here on the new PCB for the original Sony connector. So the choice is yours. So we'll go ahead and desolder and remove the original Sony power connector. Now the way I like to solder these back in is I like to go ahead, set it in place. See the fit there? Hold it in with one finger on these 2 pins. I'm going to apply a little flux to the one pin that I am not touching. Okay. And then preload my soldering tip, some fresh solder, and then I go just lay down that tack essentially on the pin that I'm not holding, so I don't burn myself. And then the flux just allows it to flow. Make a good joint there. So then go in and finish the connections here. And then I like to go ahead and reflow that initial joint as well. Next, we'll install the PCB into the metal enclosure. I like to dive it in nose first, set it down in the rear. And you just want to make sure the PCB sets in that metal cutout in the chassis in the back corner here, that it fits right into the slot. Don't want it sitting on top or below, or else it'll be twisted. Centered up is required, and then once again we'll want to just start by landing the screws and not tightening completely. Gives us a little wiggle room here to make sure everything is lined up. Okay, and then we can just land the original connector. And don't really need to quite do this step yet, but you can see that the grommet will fit into the original cutout here pretty nicely. And then once the lid, the cover, is reinstalled, it'll compress it nicely, provide some good support. As discussed with the Astec power supply, I like to install it without the cover on, so I have easy access to the harness here for manipulation while I'm installing the connector. But it's up to you on how you want to do that part. But for installing the lid, ensure that this is a slight angle here. It won't fit if it's sitting directly on edge, or it's real tight. So just lay it over a little bit. Drop the lid back into its slots, and then press into place. And this will compress the bushing here, or the grommet on the side, nicely. And then note, when installing the lid here, there's only going to be 2 screws that you used for holding the lid down. These 2 right here. And that's how to install the PCB in the Sony power supply. Now we'll work on replacing the PCB in the Hitachi, which is also known as the Made in Singapore version, because nowhere on the exterior or even on the PCB does it say Hitachi. You'll only find the company logo on the solder side. All right, to remove the cover here, we have 5 screws we need to remove. Cover comes off. You can see they got the same situation as the Sony with the clamp. All right, and we'll go ahead and remove the power connector down in there, standard Molex style. Should come out pretty easy. There we go. And then also similar to the Sony, plastic keeper guard for the wiring harness to press the tab left, right, out. And then we are left with 3 screws holding the PCB in place. And now this should slide out to the side. All right, there we have it. So with each power supply, you're going to get one Molex connector that's used for the Singapore version here, or the Hitachi. So this is an exact replacement Molex. So this way you don't have to be bothered with removing the original. So eliminate a step there, but similar to how we installed the Sony connector, goes into place where it's marked Singapore here, drops right in. I like to hold it on the 2 pins that I'm not going to solder, like so. Apply a little flux to that pin. Tin my tip, and then drop some solder on. Once it's tacked in place, go back and do the final solder. Now I'll install the PCB into the metal enclosure. Slide it in from the side. Now there's 2 points you want to make sure that you're fitted in correctly. So this has metal support here on the back side. You want to make sure it's slide in, and we also have one on the rear back here. So you just want to ensure that you're slid into that support appropriately. If you're on top or below, you're going to twist the PCB. It's not going to sit right. So line up your holes, and then we can drop in our screws. Alright, and then we'll drop in or make the Molex connection there, the mains power connection. Alright, easy as that. Then again, the middle, or the grommet, fits into the middle frame as such for harness support. And it's up to the installer if they want to put the metal cover on now or after they mount it to the analog board PCB. But just to show you, go ahead and put it on. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them in below, or you can also shoot me a message on eBay as well. See you next time.